Good morning. It's Monday, May 25th, and I'm David Coletto from Abacus Data. And we've got some new polling out today looking at how Ontarians are feeling about Doug Ford and the Ontario government. And as we look at the changes over the last few months, what's pretty clear is that Doug Ford's approval rating is up substantially over the last few months. We now have positive impressions of him up to 46%. That's up 23 percentage points over 3 months. His negatives are down 36 points from 61 in beginning of March to 25% today. And these numbers reflect the overall approval rating of the government. 60% of Ontarians approve of the job the government is doing overall, driven primarily by how the government and Mr. Ford has responded to the COVID-19 pandemic. You can see 74% approving of how they've handled that as well. 62% approving how he's communicated with people. Over half say they approve of how open and accessible the government has been, and half approve of the way the government has handled the economy. Overall, we find that positive assessments of the government are up across the board, negatives are down, and that's reflective of, I think, the overall view that people have. But one of the most important things to recognize is that Ontarians are evaluating the Premier and the government in very different ways. We did an advanced analysis looking at what the key drivers of the government's approval rating are. And what we find is that 60% of the variance in whether somebody approves or disapproves of the Ford government is almost entirely driven by their response to the pandemic and how that government has responded. So if you're somebody who strongly approves of how the government has responded, you're also much more likely to approve of the government. Other factors like being accessible and open, how the government's managed education, how it's handled the economy are important, but far less so than how they've dealt with the pandemic. And so in many ways, this renewed high level of approval across the province is through the lens of how they've handled the pandemic, which on the one hand creates new opportunities for the government to connect with people who may not have been too fond of its performance to date prior to the pandemic. But on the other hand, it also is an indication that as things return to normal, there's a risk that approval rating will drop as people respond to other things that the government does going forward. Now, one of the things that has fundamentally changed is the openness that Ontarians are to voting for the Progressive Conservatives of Ontario. You can see back in December 2019, almost half of the province said they definitely would not be voting PC in the upcoming or the next provincial election. That's down 21 points to 27%. And the number of people who say they'll definitely vote PC, probably vote PC, or even would consider voting PC are up substantially across the board. So at the very least, the Progressive Conservatives and Doug Ford have done a good job at making people more open to supporting them in the future. Now, when we ask people how they would actually vote if an election were held today, we find that the PCs and the Ontario Liberals, now led by Stephen Del Duca, are in a statistical tie, 38% for the Liberals, 36% for the PCs. Compared to the last time we asked vote intention back in May, a year ago, that's 11-point increase for the Liberals, a 7-point increase for the Progressive Conservatives, and you can see a 12-point drop for the official opposition, New Democrats, led by Andrea Horwath. And so the big picture of all of this suggests that, at least for now, Ontario politics has completely shifted. Only a few months ago, 60% plus of Ontarians had a negative view of the Premier. Today, almost a majority have a positive view of 60% approve of the job the government's done. And so as this pandemic continues, as more difficult choices are made, we'll continue to track whether it has an impact on the long-term prospects for the Progressive Conservatives and for the Ford government. Thanks.